Hey y'all, Guy here. What is perspective? No, seriously, what is it? You hear about it all the time. How it's one of the great art fundamentals along with form, lighting, color and whatever wizardry this is. How are they doing that? Everyone knows what it is, but like right now, give me a definition. And that's strange, right? How can something be so fundamental, so innately understood, but so weird at the same time? So I started googling. Perspective definition. The art of representing three-dimensional objects on a two-dimensional surface so as to give the right impression of their height, width, depth, and position in relation to each other. And yeah, I guess, but that's not quite what I'm looking for. A definition like this does tell you literally what perspective is, accurately portraying 3D on 2D, but it doesn't satisfy me. For as much as this is basically an art channel, I am a man of science. I want something more broken down, and for that, we need to look deeper. I tried looking up papers on what perspective is by What is Perspective, but that just gave me a bunch of stuff on psychology and sociology and some other weird nonsense. Not sure why that didn't work, but lesson learned, we need to be more specific. Perspective in art. That's just medicine for some reason. That's fine, let's try again. Perspective in drawing. In illustration. In painting. Sculpt. Design. Okay, fields of art. Anything in those?
Am I just stupid?
Yes. Well, kind of. Okay, here's what I think is the problem. You've heard of fisheye perspective, right? I mean, if you haven't, then you've just seen it. I don't know why it took me so long to realize, but I mean, look at the name. Fish eye perspective? If it's specified like that, then that means it's just a type of perspective. And if it is just a type of perspective, then are there any other ones? And what do you even call non-fisheye perspective? If we know that, then we might be able to actually find something. So it's back to looking, and that was surprisingly easy. I spent a bit going through a bunch of sources that were hopefully reliable. I don't actually know because I will blindly believe anything I see, but here's what I think is happening. Let's say you have a thing and you want it to look 3D, so you make some of the lines converge into one vanishing point. Perspective. And that looks fine, but maybe it's just not good enough. Okay, you add another point and make some other lines converge to it. But if you're gonna add a second one, then you might as well add a third. Point the other lines at it and you're done. That's how you get 1, 2, and 3-point perspective. And it kind of makes sense, right? We live in a reality with 3 spatial dimensions. So this way we get 1 vanishing point per axis. Except not really maybe, because these 2 are always on the same horizon line. And that's kind of an issue, because what the hell even is a horizon line and why are they on it? Let's start with that first one. I looked around a bit and found some ways to explain it. The first thing that pops up when you Google it is usually something like, the horizon line is the boundary separating the sky from the sea or land. Which isn't really that helpful. What if you wanna draw something out in space or deep underwater or any other scenario where you don't have that separation? The definition becomes kind of meaningless. A better way I've seen it explained is that the horizon line is just your eye level. And that makes sense. It's consistent with the way you do things. If something is above the line, then you draw some of its underside, because that also means it's above you. If we go back to the previous examples, then I don't really know how you would define an eye level, somewhere where you don't have a clear ground or direction, but I think we can just ignore that. So we know what the horizon line is. Okay, great. Let's get to that other question. Why are those vanishing points on it? And to answer that, after hours of rigorous research, I can now confidently say that I have absolutely no idea. So now that we don't know that, let's back up even further. All the way to the reason I started doing this whole thing in the first place. The question I want answered the most is what? Why? Huh? Yeah, how the fuck does any of this work? We live in a 2D space. 3D. Exactly, 3D, so we have 3 vanishing points. That's arguable. So the world is in 3-point perspective. Maybe? No! Oh, right, it can't be. Because then what about 1 and 2-point perspective? Why are they a thing? Yeah, that makes no sense whatsoever. So there has to be a good explanation. Yeah, no way we're both just stupid. They are. Because they're missing something really simple. I always had this idea that people who are good at perspective are these great, serious, infallible artists. And sure, a lot of them are, which is why I thought there had to be a good reason. You could explain it artistically, like how you can use 1-point perspective to direct the attention somewhere, or 3-point perspective to show the scale of something. And that's fine, but it just confused me. How do some of the points just disappear? What those 2 missed isn't some weird geometrical explanation. It's just that people are lazy sometimes. The points don't just disappear. They're sometimes just so far out of the image that why would you even bother drawing them? It's not like they make a big difference, so you just ignore the ones you don't need. And that's... well, it's not fine, because that means I just spent a lot of time reaching a really dumb conclusion, but it also poses more questions, because now I want to know, how far can you push this? I mean, why stop at 3 points? Can you go higher than that? Turns out, you can! And it creates a whole new category. All of that was just linear perspective, because you use lines. If you add another point, then some of them start curving. And do I know why only some of them do? No! But if you add another point, then all of them will. Hey guys, future me here. No they won't. There are still some straight lines, and I was just wrong back then. And that's how you finally get fisheye perspective, that's how it connects. This is a really bizarre explanation, and I might just be wrong, but this is the only way I've been able to make sense of any of this. Look at this flat sheet. Any z vanishing points don't do anything because there's no depth, and any x and y points are so far that you can just ignore them. So this is correctly in perspective, right? But no, that doesn't really work. The point of having points in point-based perspective is to show how far things are from the camera's point of view. So then this point should be smaller than this point because it's further away. If you expand that and divide the sheet, then these sections should be smaller, since their points are further from the camera. And if you keep dividing and adjusting, then eventually, you just get curved lines. That's all this fifth point is there for, to make sure that every point of this sheet is the same distance from the intersection of the horizon lines. And it just looks like a sphere because it's a constant radius going to the same point. Why this point? I have no idea, but it looks right and I'm beyond the point of questioning it. And then it's the same thing as before. This is technically more realistic, I think, but you just ignore it in most cases because why would you bother with 5 points when 3 or less are fine? So this is it, right? I mean, you can go higher than 5 points, but I'm not even gonna try to understand that. The type of perspective depends on how many points you have. From 4 on you have curved lines, go lower to 1 and they're straight. But what if you go even lower? I didn't even consider this as an option, but it just popped up while I was looking for other things. You can just have 0 points. None of the lines converge anywhere and there's no depth, but you can do it and it still looks 3D. I don't think it's useful for anything other than geometry like this, but if you give it some color, then you get atmospheric perspective, which is a pretty simple concept, but I had no idea it had a name. If you wanna draw a distant landscape, then obviously you're not even gonna try to get the perspective of every detail exactly right. So then, how do you show depth? Well, you ignore pretty much everything I've said in this entire video and you just use colors instead. As things get further away, they lose contrast and saturation. They blend in with the background, and if you want a camera effect, then they get blurry. And that works fine enough. Ultimately, the goal is to represent a 3D space on a 2D surface. While they are cool, you don't always need some weird points and lines to do that. There are different ways of doing it. A lot that I didn't mention here, and probably a lot more that I don't even know about. So let's circle back to the initial question. What is perspective? Everything that I've said in this video might just be wrong. This is a complicated topic that I have barely scratched the surface of, and I could just have the wrong idea about all of it. But to answer that question to the absolute best of my knowledge, perspective is the